You know what that music means? It means it is Thoroughly Jewish Thursday here on The Line of Fire. And sometimes on a Thursday, we'll focus on issues relative to Islam. A few months back, we had on the air Deborah Weiss. She's an attorney, author, public speaker, considered an expert in the defamation of religions, UN resolutions, and the Islamist stifling of speech. She was a contributing author to the book Saudi Arabia and the Global Islamic Terrorist Network, the primary author of Counsel on American Islamic Relations, its use of lawfare and intimidation, and her new book, The Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Jihad on Free Speech. There's going to be a convention, a conference September 8th in D.C., ACT for America's National Conference, and she will be one of the main speakers there. So I've got a bunch of questions, specific and general, for Deborah. Deborah, great to have you with us on The Line of Fire today.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Brown.
Well, before we get into the specifics, who OIC is, what's their plan, what are their goals, and then the larger question of the Islamic attack on free speech, have you followed what happened with Curt Schilling, the baseball pitcher and analyst, in the last few days?
I have, actually. I was just reading about it today, yes.
All right. Is that, to you, symptomatic of the larger problem that we're dealing with?
Absolutely, because in America, we have the First Amendment, so we're not going to have a law anytime in the near future that prohibits the stifling of speech, but we're self-censoring, and in this case, other censoring. So there's a variety of societal pressures for people not to say anything bad about Islam, even if it's true. He didn't make a racist comment. All he said was that only 5 to 10% of Muslims are, quote, extremists, and only 7% of Germans were Nazis. So
Right.
How is that racist? He didn't mention a race, and who is that offensive to? He didn't say anything about all Muslims. Are people worried about him offending Muslim extremists? Because that's the only thing he said anything about.
Exactly. All right, so this is part of a larger problem. We're not attacking all Muslims. We know there are plenty of peace-loving Muslims, honorable Muslims, and Muslims who are appalled by radical Islam. We also know that there are organizations in the States that give the appearance of being fair-minded, even-handed, but when you dig deeper, you find out that's not the case. All right, so let's open this up. The OIC. Who or what is the OIC?
The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC, is the second largest international organization in the world, right behind the UN, and it is the largest Islamic organization in the world. It's comprised of 56 UN member states plus the Palestinian Authority, and they're basically the largest voting bloc in the UN. They have quite a lot of influence there, and they have a stranglehold on the Human Rights Council, and most people have no idea who they are, but they're extremely powerful.
All right. Well, you say we don't know who they are, but they're extremely powerful. Does the world know who they are? In other words, the UN, do they know who they are? Our American government, are we aware of who they are, what their influence is?
Oh, sure. Governments are aware of who they are. The members obviously know their members, and unfortunately, our administration is working with them now on speech-stifling measures. But in the past, yes, at the government level, at the head of state level, all the governments do know who they are, but the public doesn't. And I think it's important for the public to know who they are and understand what they're doing to, on one hand, stifle free speech, on another hand, to condemn Israel just for being a Jewish state, and so we can hold our elected officials accountable in whatever participation they engage in with the OIC. It's important for the public to have the truth.
Very, very important to educate people. You've obviously looked at this through the eye of an attorney. I don't think you're a conspiracy theorist. It's basically, here's the evidence, and oh my, this is shocking. So you talk about OIC's 10-year plan. What is that?
Yes. First I want to address your point about a conspiracy theory. First of all, the information that I have gotten about the OIC is not from hearsay or gossip. It's mostly from the OIC itself. I have spent years and years studying the OIC UN resolutions, their own Islamophobia reports, their speeches, and it's from them that I have gotten their information, not from secondhand sources. And second of all, I'll now that you mentioned about a conspiracy, I'll just tell you as an attorney, there is such a thing as a conspiracy. It's not always just a theory, and depending on what you're conspiring to do, it can be criminal. Anyway, the OIC's 10-year plan was launched in 2005, so we are now in the 10th year of the 10-year plan. And one of the important components of that plan was to combat Islamophobia in a way that is tantamount to encouraging Islamic blasphemy laws in the West. So they had a number of goals that they were aspiring to achieve, and one of them was to pass a UN resolution that would combat Islamophobia, which has been accomplished in March of 2011 with the help of the U.S., by the way. And the other is to work with European governments to get them to pass their own domestic legislation to criminalize speech that would shed a negative light on Islam. And unfortunately, they've made quite a bit of progress in Europe. So there are not thought police walking around that will arrest you if they overhear a conversation on the street. However, if you make a public statement and a Muslim group files a complaint or calls the police, it will be a problem for you. Depending on the country, it could be a civil problem for you. You might be slapped with a fine. And increasingly, it's becoming a criminalized problem. So, potentially you could go to jail. It's a big problem.
All right. Can you give me we've got about 3 minutes before the next break, so we've got a little time here. Can you give me a concrete example or two from Europe so we know, for instance, of what you're actually talking about?
I sure can. Just a few weeks ago in Ireland, there was a pastor named James McConnell who gave a sermon which was live streamed over the internet, where he said that he thought that Islam had satanic doctrine. And he and a Muslim group called the police and said that he might have some kind of hate speech motive, and he was arrested. So they gave him a chance to recant his comments, and he refused. It was the Belfast Islamic Center called the police, and he refused to recant, and so he was scheduled for a hearing for a criminal prosecution and faces the potential of 6 months in jail for making that comment in a church sermon.
Right. So your average Christian believes that the Bible is true, that Jesus is the promised Savior, and that there are other false prophets and false religions that are satanic deceptions. So they would think of Islam as a satanic deception, or Muhammad as a false prophet or something like that. Just like Muslims would look at Christians and say that we're deceived or we're believing lies. So what he said would be kind of normal Christian doctrine, that there is satanic deceptions. I mean, the Quran claims to have the original version of the Bible and rewrites parts of the Bible. And a Christian believes in the Trinity, and the Quran flatly denies that. And Muhammad claims unique inspiration, which Jesus warned about. So this is a pretty basic thing, and yet potentially faces 6 months in jail. All right, Deborah, we've got a minute before the break. But if you could leave my listeners, we got more time to talk, but with a bit of a warning, a bit of a wake-up call, what would you say?
This is an example that shows how critical it is to have free speech for religious freedom. It's a critical cornerstone freedom for religious freedom, for human rights, and national security. And it's important for your audience to understand that there is a movement of Islamist organizations and individuals that are working fastidiously to take that freedom away. Some of them do it by violence, like the shooting in Garland, Texas, or Charlie Hebdo. Some of them do it by UN resolutions. Some of them do it by societal pressure to get you to self-censor. But unless we understand our Judeo-Christian values and stand up on principle for freedom, then there's nothing we can do to change the Muslims who have their minds made up like that. But what we have to really guard against is to make sure that they don't change us. And that would be my point.
Got it. All right, friends, we've got more time with Deborah, clear, articulate. To find out more, go to vigilancenow.org. You can read Deborah's articles, her speeches, you can listen to, you can order her book about the attack on free speech, vigilancenow.org. We'll be right back with Deborah Weiss. That is, again, Paul Wilbur, one of my dear friends, Messianic Jewish worship leader, singing praises to God, which tells you it is Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. We might take some calls in a while, 866-34-TRUTH, if you'd like to raise questions on this subject of Islam and free speech. My guest is an expert in this subject, Deborah Weiss. So let's talk about something that we've all heard about, namely Islamophobia. So we're talking about the stifling of free speech by Islamic organizations, that you can't criticize Islam, you can't differ with Islam. If you speak against radical Islam, you're somehow offending all Muslims, and that there's some who try to stop us through extreme violence, the Charlie Hebdo attacks. There are others who try to stop us with legislation. Again, this is documented. And it's a strange thing, Deborah. Americans, by and large, Europeans, by and large, they're utterly repulsed by the actions of radical Islam and see it as very foreign and ugly and wrong. And yet there's this hypersensitivity so as not to offend Islam. It's kind of a strange thing, isn't it?
It sure is. The whole notion of multiculturalism and moral equivalency, and, I'm guessing that you would agree with me, Dr. Brown, if I say that Judeo-Christian values are not equivalent to Islamic values. Certainly, yeah. I'll say Islamist values, the values of those who are, terrorists or who have other anti-freedom aspirations. And I don't think there's anything wrong with us standing up and saying that our values are better. And you know what? If we don't, we're really in jeopardy of losing our freedom. And if we do, it won't come back. I'll say that in the West, a lot of people don't ask the question of what is Islamophobia. It's just assumed. It's assumed that what we're talking about is bigotry or prejudice, and they equate it with things like racism or sexism. And but that is not what the OIC or CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, or Al-Qaeda, or any other Islamist groups mean when they say Islamophobic. What they mean is anything that gets in the way of their Islamist supremacist ideal. You have to remember that Islam in its full-blown expression is not just a religion, it's a political ideology. The goal is to establish an Islamic caliphate and impose Sharia law on everybody, whether they're Muslim or not. So if you admit the existence of Islamophobia, just to acknowledge, for example, that 9/11 was an Islamic terrorist attack, is Islamophobic speech. But it doesn't just limit itself to speech. It pertains to any national security policy or practice that protects our country against violent or stealth enemies of freedom if those enemies are Muslim. So, and in corporations or societal institutions such as academia, it's Islamophobic not to exempt Muslims from the laws under which the rest of us have to live. If you support the Patriot Act provisions or terrorist prevention legislation or visa restrictions or refugee vetting or surveillance or interrogations for those who pose a credible threat to our freedom and national security based on their Islamic supremacist beliefs, then you are an Islamophobe. So when they use the word, it has a much broader meaning than when we use the word, and I think we have to really examine what the point of it is. If you call somebody an Islamophobe, it is a tactic akin to calling somebody any other name, and it shuts down the debate. That's the point of it. If you're a bigot, if you're a racist, if you're a sexist and if you're an Islamophobe, then that's the end of the discussion. We don't have to discuss, is there such a thing as Islamic terrorism? Can we do something to stop it? Should we do something to stop it? Because talking about it is verboten.
All right. So why do you think our president is so loath to use the term radical Islam or Islamic terrorists?
Well, I think he's completely on board with this agenda. It's very evident if you follow this issue in everything this administration does. I really hate to say it, because when I started doing this work, which was years and years and years ago, I made a point to stay out of the political arena. And it wasn't that hard back then. But starting with Bush and getting a lot worse with this administration, it's just impossible. It cannot be a coincidence. It cannot be that he doesn't know what's going on, because this administration actually worked with Mubarak of Egypt when Mubarak was in power to draft one of the UN resolutions that, if it were made binding law, would have the effect of clamping down on speech that criticizes Islam in total contravention to the U.S. First Amendment. So if you look at what he's done in the past few years, our FBI, CIA, National Counterterrorism Center, and all of our federal agencies have completely rewritten their national security training materials and purged it from all lexicon that mentions anything about Islamic terrorism or Islamist ideology. So they're still learning about terrorist behavior, but they're not being taught the goals and the aspirations of Islamists, and that anyone who knows anything about national security will know that that is an important component of it. But you are right, Dr. Brown, that this administration, and it's not just Obama, it's John Kerry. When she was in office, it was Hillary Clinton. It's all of them. John Kerry has said that the worst mistake we could make would be to associate any religion with some of the terrorist acts. I mean, France has declared war on radical Islam, and other countries might not be handling it properly, but they at least know what the problem is. And they're pretty much laughing at it, because we have a president who stands up on TV and says that the Islamic State is neither Islamic nor a state, or that Kerry says that no religion condones the killings of innocents. Is he an Islamic theologian now? Is he the imam?
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
If you look at the policies of this administration, they have sided with Islamists over freedom lovers over and over and over. And that is true whether we're talking about standing idly by during the 2009 Green Revolution in Iran, when people were dying in the streets for freedom.
And they were right, and they were looking to America. In fact, let me just jump in here, because we got a break. And they were looking to America. They were sending out messages in English on the streets, wanting President Obama, this champion of freedom, to stand up for them. And they were shocked when it didn't happen. You can call us Islamophobes, or you can say we're speaking the truth, and let every freedom-loving Muslim say amen with us. Make sure you go to AskDrBrown.org, AskDrBrown.org. Check out this week's special resource offer, and check out my latest article, An Open Letter to Donald Trump. Thanks, friends. That Jewish or Middle Eastern music reminds us it is Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. My guest, Deborah Weiss. Go to vigilancenow.org, vigilancenow.org, to read her articles, listen to her speeches, or find out about her new book, The Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Jihad on Free Speech. Deborah, why do you think that moderate Muslims in America, moderate Muslims, I'm talking about in leadership and things like that, why do you think moderate Muslims are not standing with us loudly and clearly enough, calling for freedoms and saying, hey, this is a free country. You want to draw a picture of Muhammad? We don't like it, but that's your freedom. Why aren't they vocal on our behalf?
I think there can be a myriad of reasons, Dr. Brown. I don't think it's necessarily the same reason for all Muslims. I think that some of them are in fear if they still have families that live in Islamic theocracies like Saudi Arabia or Iran. There can be a severe punishment for it to their family members. I think that some of them, quite frankly, I think a lot of them are in denial. I'll give you a really good story of a man I met a few years ago at an event. I was at a think tank, and the panelists were talking about various activities of Islamists. And I thought they were kind of underplaying it, that things were worse than the panelists said. So I was chatting to the guy next to me, who turned out that he was from, I think it was Egypt. He was from an Islamic country, and he had a thick accent. And I told him, I thought they were downplaying it. He said, "You're completely right." And then he started telling me his views, which were in accord with mine. And then as the conversation went on, he told me that he has a son. And I said to him, "So is your son Muslim? Are you raising your son Muslim?" And he said to me, "Of course not. How could I possibly raise my son Muslim after everything I just told you? I'm raising him to believe that Jews and Christians and all people are equal, and to believe in human rights and treat everybody with respect and dignity." I said, "Oh, that's great." And then as we talked a little longer, he started telling me about his mother. And I asked him, I said to him, "Have you converted? Have you considered converting to," I said Christianity, even though I'm Jewish, because doubt if he's going to convert to Judaism. But I said, "Have you converted or considered converting?" And he said to me, "Of course not. How could I possibly convert? It would kill my mother. That's my identity. That's my heritage." So there you have the whole dilemma in the nutshell of that one man. I do think there are a lot of Muslims who don't really even know their own religion if they're raised in the West. They haven't read the Quran. They might not speak Arabic, which is what the sermons are given in, even in Western mosques. I think a lot of them are in denial, and they only pick and choose the phrases that sound nice and touchy-feely, because it must be a very difficult thing to come to terms with the fact that your upbringing, your family, your roots, your heritage really have at their core hatred and intolerance for people of other faiths. And I think a lot of them are in denial.
Yeah, I think that is the case. There's a stream of Islam that is more liberal and that seeks to read the Quran differently and interpret the traditions differently. The problem is a lot of the weight of history is against it. All right, I've got a few more questions for Deborah Weiss. I want to talk about Islamic blasphemy laws and then just make sure you, our listeners, understand the mentality of Islam. Just like there's a mentality in Judaism and then there's a mentality in Christianity, there's a mentality in Islam. Our guest, Deborah Weiss, will help sort that out. It is Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. Look, as a follower of Jesus, I'm a Jewish follower of Jesus, but as a follower of Jesus, I want to share the good news. I want to share the gospel with everyone. I'd love it if all the world turned to the faith. And basically, we reach out, we serve, we do what we know how to do to bring this message to people, this good news. And if they turn, then as their hearts turn, there'll be changes in the nation as well. We don't grow by the sword. We don't grow by military expansion. We don't grow by taking over, but by bringing in this new message. If you are a traditional Jew, you want to live as a Jew and let the world follow their other religions. That's fine. But you're not trying to impose this on others. If you're a Muslim, Islam does not mean peace, it means submission. The goal is to bring the world into submission to Allah, but because Islam, like Judaism, is a law-based religion, that means bringing the entire world under Islamic law. See, Jews just want Jews to live by Jewish law, and that's what they're trying to do. And again, they're not trying to impose that on everyone else, but Islam ultimately has a vision of domination because that's part of the mindset. As my friend Dr. James White has pointed out, that Muhammad was first a spiritual leader, then a political leader, then a military leader. So the three things really do get intertwined. Question then, Deborah, the issue of Islamic blasphemy laws, how does that play in with the stifling of freedom of speech, especially, say, in America, where, and even Europe, where Muslims are still in the minority? So how do these Islamic blasphemy laws, you'll have them say in a country like Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or Iran, how does that play into the larger Islamic world?
Right. So just so your audience knows, in every single Muslim country, even if it's fairly relatively liberal or secular, they still always have two Islamic laws. One is apostasy, which means you cannot convert from Islam to another religion, and the other is Islamic blasphemy, which is you cannot say anything negative about Islam, and in a lot of cases, that means you can't even question the theocratic government, even raise a question, and there'll be severe punishments for that, ranging from fines to flogging and even execution. But in the West, let me be clear that the target of all of these groups, well, not necessarily the violent ones, but the OIC and CARE, the target of these groups is the West. They're not trying to change what's happening in their own countries. They want Islamic blasphemy laws in America and in Europe. And if they were to come out and say that, everybody would laugh at them. Nobody would say, oh, okay, we'll do that. So instead what they do is they use words that sound more palatable to us here. And the word specifically that they use is defamation. They say that they don't want to have defamation of religions, and they say religions. But if you look at their speeches over and over and over, and if you look at how they apply that concept in their own countries, it's very clear that the only religion they're really worried about defaming is their own religion. And by defaming, they have a very different definition of the word than we do here in America. In America, defamation has to be a false statement of fact. It only applies to people. It does not apply to ideas or policies or religions. That's what free speech is. We have a free marketplace of ideas, and let the best idea rise to the top or not, but you can have free discussion on any religion or political ideologies or any other ideas you want. That is protected speech. We don't have a concept here that's called defamation of religions. And if you say something that's true, even if it's about a person, no matter how bad it is, it's not considered defamation. But the OIC and CARE think that anything that sheds a negative light on Islam is defamation, and defamation of religions is the phrase that they've used repeatedly in UN resolutions, which we did pass over and over and over for years. We've recently changed the language, but I don't know if I'll get into that. We're still supporting that concept. And in Europe, they don't use the phrase blasphemy. They'll have other laws. The laws will be, for example, the denigration of a recognized religion. And if you say that Muhammad was a pedophile because he married a 9-year-old girl, then that's denigration of a recognized religion, and you can get slapped with a fine for that. So they'll use different language. In Europe, they'll call it a hate speech law or denigration of a recognized religion or defamation, or sometimes it'll be called a public order law. But whatever the phrase is, in its application, it is tantamount to an Islamic blasphemy law. It's applied very disproportionately to speech that says something negative about Islam only, and those laws act as a deterrent from having that kind of speech and a punishment if you choose to engage in it. So obviously the punishments in Europe aren't going to be the kind of punishments you see in the Middle East. Nobody's going to get flogged or executed, but it still acts as a proxy for Islamic blasphemy laws by discouraging it and punishing it.
And you know what's so interesting is, as I look at all of this, I remember hearing Louis Farrakhan was once asked to renounce some act of Islamic terror, And he said, I renounce all acts of terror, be they Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. And then you'll have Palestinian Authority. They're asked to renounce some horrific act of violence, a Palestinian terrorist killing Jewish children. And he said, we renounce all acts of violence, be they Palestinian or the Zionist entity, something like that. Now, if you ask a Christian to renounce the killing of an abortion doctor, when something like that happens, very rare but still terrible when it happens, the Christian will immediately say, I'm pro-life. Of course I renounce that. That's murder. They'll make a categorical statement about that. They don't have to say, I renounce all violence, including Christian or Muslim, because we can freely say it. So you're saying that the Islamic approach is to couch it in larger terms, defamation of all religions, but they're really just talking about don't you dare speak a word against Muhammad or against the scriptures. We've just got about 3 minutes left. I do appreciate your time joining with us, but I'm not a fan of the Muhammad cartoon contest thing because to me it unnecessarily provokes some things, and I still want to have dialogue with Muslims while I expose radical Islam and so on. However, free country, able to do it. The fact that now you get a killer exposed through all this, it's kind of an eye-opener. What's your take right now in America? Are we waking up to what's happening, or are we like the frog in boiling water?
Unfortunately, Dr. Brown, I do think that we're like the frog in boiling water. War is deceit, and we are in a war. It is not with Al-Qaeda or ISIS or one particular group. The way Islamist supremacist groups look at it as it's one war with different groups and different theaters. And the way to have corruption, and the biggest deceit, starts with the corruption of language. And the reason they want to silence us is, number one, as you said, to make us submit to Islamic blasphemy laws. You know, they have the Book of Mormon on Broadway, and nobody's killing people over that. And if you're not Muslim, you know, if you are Muslim, no one's making you draw a cartoon of Muhammad. So if you're not Muslim, why should you be forced to submit to their Islamic blasphemy laws? But the second reason is having that silence and the blasphemy, in effect, creates a safe space for those who have supremacist ideals to further engage along their path of aspirations without the public knowing what's going on. So it's really important for us to understand what's happening and to refuse to concede bigotry if we're talking about Islamic terrorism or Islamic persecution of Christians in the Middle East. We have to take our lexicon back, because what they're doing is they're using the distortion and manipulation of language in order to deceive us and help them win the war.
All right, friends, you have been clearly forewarned. Deborah Weiss, an attorney. This is stuff that came to her. This is not a battle she picked. This is stuff that came to her. Go to the website, vigilancenow.org. You can find out about her new monograph. The organization.
I'll just say the book, actually, Dr. Brown, the monograph is not on my website, but you can find it on Amazon.
Okay, got it. So on Amazon, Deborah Weiss, the book, The Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Jihad on Free Speech. The website, vigilancenow.org, for others, articles and speeches by Deborah. Hey, I know this can be tiring work, but you are tireless in it. So keep warning, keep speaking, and we'll do our best to trumpet the message as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you for all your work, and thank you for having me.
All right, much appreciated. Friends, I've got time for a couple of questions on the other side of the break. So you're on the phones, stay right there, and I'll get to you. I have a question for you. Who was the first man in recorded history to be called rabbi? Was it one of the first century Jewish teachers like Hillel or Shammai? Or maybe one of the ancient Israelite leaders like Moses or Ezra? Actually, it was a contemporary of Hillel and Shammai, the man commonly known as John the Baptist. Rabbi John the Baptist? Well, in fact, John the Baptist wasn't a Baptist. He was a baptizer, meaning someone who immersed people in water. His Hebrew name was Yochanan, and he called for people to go through ritual immersion, which is a very Jewish practice. Christians call it baptism, but it's actually an ancient biblical rite that symbolizes spiritual cleansing. And what was Rabbi Yochanan's message? Do tshuva. In other words, repent and get right with God. That was from our TV show, Is Christianity Jewish? it was really informative, eye-opening episode that we did. Well produced. I was joined by Messianic Jewish leader Sam Nadler. We had him on in the first hour. And you can get that DVD. In fact, we'll give it to you when you order two other resources, and we've reduced those prices as well. 100 minutes, almost 2 hours of teaching on the appointed times, God's feasts, why they're important for all Christians, all believers today, filmed on location in Israel. I'm talking about one of these, your jaw will drop when you realize that's what he meant. That's what Jesus was saying. And then 2 hours of teaching, 120 minutes, Professors Walt Kaiser, Michael Rydelnik, Darrell Bach, and I, all talking about the mysterious prophecy of Isaiah 53, opening up the Hebrew, the background in a way that anyone can understand. So get those resources. The entire package is only $40 postage paid. So take advantage of this just this week, 1-800-278-9978, 1-800-278-9978. Or to find out more, to watch some of the clips, go to Ask Dr. Brown, askdrbrown.org. Let's go to Jacksonville, Florida. Harold, welcome to the Line of Fire.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
My question is concerning the book of Daniel in the 70-week prophecy. They talk about, some people say that it's already been fulfilled, and there's debate about these things. And I watched the video where the guy said that 69 of this week has already been fulfilled, and until up to the crucifixion, and that the last week will be fulfilled in the end of time. So my question to you is, what is your take on it? And secondly, I know there's going to be a rebuilding of a temple if it's something that hasn't happened yet. Do you see any desire from the Jewish people to build the temple again and have animal sacrifices also?
Yes, great questions, Harold. First, those that would read the 70-week prophecy of Daniel, primarily laid out in Daniel 9:24-27, those who would read it in terms of the 69 weeks, meaning 69 periods of 7 years, as reaching up to the crucifixion, and then the 70th week separated until the end of this age, they tend to be dispensationalists, those who believe in a pre-trib rapture, who believe that we're in the church age now, and it's like a giant parenthesis on God's calendar. And when the church is raptured out, then God will start dealing with Israel again in a salvific way, but also in the midst of great judgment and wrath. And that's when the 70th week will be fulfilled. To me, that really does violence to the text in Daniel 9, which seems to be speaking of events that will happen, culminating with the destruction of the second temple in the year 70. So I personally believe that the 70 weeks are fulfilled, but the key thing that we agree on was pointing to the crucifixion of the Messiah and everything that took place, that there was a time frame in which it took place, and it does point to Jesus. The problem is once you separate that 70th week without any basis within the text itself, you've got this massively long period, this gap. Well, maybe you have other massively long gaps, in which case maybe it's not the crucifixion, maybe it's still something in the future. So to me, that weakens the reading of the text. Will there be a rebuilt temple before the Messiah returns? Do some of the prophecies of the New Testament, Matthew 24, 2 Thessalonians 2, do they presuppose that there'll be a temple standing when the Messiah returns with animal sacrifices in place? It's possible. I don't necessarily say that it has to happen before the Messiah returns, but it could well be something that is prophesied and will take place. And Jewish people pray for it. Religious Jews pray for it daily. But they believe that when the Messiah is revealed, that'll be one of the things he does. Hey, Harold, I've got to run. If you've got follow-up questions, you can always write to the website or call another day. But thank you, sir, for great questions. We go to Marion, North Carolina. Andrew, our time is short, so let's dive right in.
Hey, good afternoon, Dr. Brown. The question is regarding the Tetragrammaton Yud Hey Vav Hey. Are we confident we know how to pronounce it correctly?
Relatively confident. We know for sure. Yeah, we're quite sure that the Yehovah pronunciation is absolutely wrong, even though there's been a movement, a Karaite Jew named Nehemiah Gordon and his teachings became popularized through some Christian outlets. He's advocated for that, but I see absolutely no academic support. Nehemiah is a sharp guy in terms of knowing the Hebrew and things, but I see absolutely no support for that whatsoever. And the best evidence that we have, although there are questions still because of verb forms and what was existing in ancient Hebrew and what wasn't, to me the best evidence we have would be that his name was pronounced Yahweh, which would have had more meaning and significance, or at least sounded more normal in an ancient Israelite ear than it would in a modern American ear or Western ear. But I do believe that the evidence points strongly in the direction of Yahweh. I was just reading someone trashing that online and thinking, where in the world did you get that from? Even the short form of Yah, and then at the end of names like Eliyahu, which would be my God is Yahu, which would be a shortened form for Yahweh. There's good, strong evidence for some ancient Semitic evidence of verbal forms and other things pointing in that direction. The play on words from Exodus 3, Ehyeh, Asher Ehyeh, I am who I am, or I will be who I will be, then it would be that same verbal form of the one who causes things to be, the one who brings all things into existence. We just don't have examples of that verbal form within Hebrew, hence questions and objections. The fact that we're not 100% sure, to me, is fitting in that it's about who he is as opposed to how his name is pronounced. Hey, I've got to run, but if you go to my website, AskDrBrown.org, and just type in Yahweh or Jehovah, you can read an article where I wrote more about it. But got to run. Thank you for the questions. All right, again, friends, please visit AskDrBrown.org. Check out my latest blog. I took some time to expose a really deceptive review of Outlasting the Gay Revolution, which, by the way, we're getting some wonderful reviews from readers who are encouraged and blessed and being changed by the book. I'm thrilled with some of the first reviews coming in. I also wrote an open letter to Donald Trump, and that's getting some attention at AskDrBrown.org. When you're there, be sure again to check out the special, very Jewish resource offered this week. My bottom line today, let us have our eyes open with any movement, any group that tries to restrict our God-given freedoms.